Zachary Finn, known simply as Zach to his friends, was not your usual space traveler. He wasn't a soldier or an adventurous explorer, but a mechanic. He spent more time fixing machines than talking to people. In the vastness of space, his skills were extremely valuable. He could repair anything, from small plasma wires to complicated starship engines, which made him essential to the Galactic Union's fleet. He was heading to a remote outpost on the edge of the Terran expanse when he first heard a distress signal. His ship, the Nebula Warden, was built for deep space repairs and was filled with spare parts and tools. The ship's AI, Alpha, was checking their destination when the signal interrupted the quiet of space. "Zach, I'm picking up an emergency broadcast," Alpha announced in its calm voice. Zach, sitting in the pilot's chair with a cup of synthetic coffee, immediately paid attention. "What kind of signal?" he asked. "It's an audio-only weak transmission on an open frequency. No encryption," Alpha replied. Zach frowned and put his coffee aside. "Let's hear it." Static filled the cabin until a voice came through, weak and desperate. "Help us. Ship compromised. Life support failing. Please, anyone." Zach frowned. The voice was a female alien, filled with panic. He could tell this wasn't a normal call for help. It was urgent. "Alpha, find the source of that signal." "How far are they?" he ordered, his mind racing. "The signal is about 0.5 sectors from our location, on a direct path to our destination. We can reach them in 15 minutes at full speed," Alpha replied. "Set a course. Maximum speed." Zach commanded. The engines of the Nebula Warden roared to life as the ship sped through space. Zach was focused. He knew every second mattered. The longer they took, the fewer chances the crew had to survive. As the Nebula Warden approached the signal's source, the ship's sensors found the damaged vessel. A large star cruiser, its sleek hull now burned and broken. The ship floated in silence, with only the faint glow of emergency lights, showing it was still functioning. "Alpha, scan for life signs," Zach ordered, already fearing the worst. Life signs detected. About 3 individuals in the central section. Life support is failing fast. Oxygen levels are critically low. Zach's heart raced. He didn't know what had happened to the ship, but he knew that whoever was aboard didn't have much time left. He started the docking sequence, guiding the Nebula Warden closer to the damaged cruiser. As the airlocks aligned, Zach quickly put on his spacesuit, securing his helmet and checking his oxygen levels. The suit systems confirmed he was good to go. Docking complete. Airlock secure, Alpha confirmed. Zach grabbed his toolkit, threw it over his shoulder, and headed toward the airlock. As the outer door of his ship slid opened, he was greeted by the sight of the cruiser's airlockets, panels sparking and half melted from. Some kind of energy blast the ship had. Been in a battle, that much was clear, but Zach couldn't tell if the attackers were. Still, nearby Alpha, any sign of hostile vessels. In the vicinity, Zach asked as he began. Working on the airlock negative, Zach. Sensors show no active ships within a 10 kilometers radius, however there are residual. Energy signatures consistent with weapons fire the attackers may have left. Recently, Zach nodded, focusing on the task at hand. The airlock's control panel was beyond repair, so he had to manually bypass the system. It wasn't easy. The circuitry was fried in multiple places, and Zach had to dig deep into his bag of tricks to get the door to respond. After a tense few minutes, there was a loud hiss, and the airlock door slid open. Stale thin air rushed out, almost taking Zach by surprise. He quickly stepped inside, sealing the door behind him before the oxygen could dissipate. Further, the interior of the cruiser was a mess. The emergency lights cast a sickly red hue over everything, illuminating debris, fallen ceiling, panels, and the occasional bark from damaged conduits. Zach moved quickly, his steps echoing in the silence as he followed the signal from his wrist. Scanner toward the life signs. The corridors were narrow and the walls bore the scorch marks of energy weapons, evidence of the fierce battle that had taken place. He passed a few bodies along the way members of the ship's crew there. Uniforms torn and charred, Zack felt a pang of sorrow for them, but he couldn't afford to dwell on it. The survivors were his priority. Finally, after navigating several turns and bypassing more damaged doors, Zack reached the source of the signal. He stood before a heavily reinforced door, thicker and more secure than the others he had encountered. This was likely a safe room or a command center designed to protect its occupants in case of an emergency. The control panel was smashed, likely a result of the ship's attackers attempting to force their way in. Zack wasted no time setting down his toolkit and getting to work. He pulled out a portable power supply and connected it to the panel's remains, trying to reroute power to the door mechanism. As he worked, sweat trickled down his forehead despite the suit's internal cooling system. The minutes ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity. Finally, after what felt like hours but was only a few minutes, the door shuttered and slowly slid open with a low grinding noise. Zack stepped inside, and his breath caught in his throat. The room was small, dimly lit by a single overhead light in the center. Three figures huddled together, their bodies trembling from cold and fear. They were unlike any species Zack had ever encountered, tall and slender with skin that shimmered in shades of violet and teal. Their features were delicate, almost ethereal, with large luminous eyes that seemed to glow in the dark. One of them, the one in the center, lifted her head as Zack entered. Her eyes met his, and for a moment time seemed to stand still. There was a mixture of fear and hope in her gaze, a silent plea for help. "Are you here to save us?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with desperation. Zack nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "Yes, I'm here to help. Can you stand? We need to get out of here fast." The woman, Leora, as he would soon learn, nodded weakly. "We can walk, but we must hurry. The air, it's getting thin." Zack moved forward, helping them to their feet. As they stood, he realized just how tall they were, each one nearly 7 foot tall, their limbs long and graceful despite their obvious exhaustion. They carried themselves with a certain dignity, a resilience that spoke of their strength. "Follow me," Zack said, leading the way back through the corridors. "My ship is docked nearby. We'll be safe there." As they made their way back, Leora and her companions leaned on each other for support. Caught their steps slow and unsteady. Zack couldn't help but glance back at them every few seconds, his mind racing with questions. Who were they? Why had their ship been attacked? And what kind of danger had they narrowly escaped? But there was no time for answers now. As they approached the airlock, the ship shuddered, a low groan reverberating through the walls. Zack's heart skipped a beat. He knew that sound. The cruiser was losing integrity. The hull was about to give way. Move. Zack urged, ushering the women into the airlock. He quickly sealed the inner door and activated the docking release. The Nebula Warden disengaged from the cruiser just as the first cracks appeared in the hull. Zack rushed to the cockpit, his heart pounding as he initiated the engines. The ship pulled away from the dying cruiser, and as they did, Zack saw the starship split apart, debris scattering into the void. "Alpha status," Zack called out, his hands flying over the controls. "Structural integrity of the cruiser has been compromised. Explosion imminent." Zack didn't wait to hear more. He engaged the ship's thrusters, putting as much distance between them and the cruiser as possible. Moments later, a blinding flash filled the view screen as the cruiser detonated, sending a shock wave rippling through space. The Nebula Warden rocked slightly from the blast, but the shields held firm. Zack let out a breath. He didn't realize he had been holding his hands trembling as the adrenaline began to wear off. Explosion contained no further threats detected, Alpha reported calmly. Zack leaned back in his seat, closing his eyes. For a moment they had made it, barely, but they had made it. He glanced over his shoulder at the alien women who were now seated on the floor of the cockpit, breathing heavily but alive. "You're safe now," Zack said, his voice softer. "We all safe?" Leora looked up, At him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Zachary Finn, you have saved our lives." Zach smiled the warmth of their words cutting through the coldness of space. "Just doing my job," he replied. But deep down he knew that this was no ordinary rescue. Something told him that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't yet imagine. As the nebula Warden drifted through the stars, leaving the wreckage behind, Zach couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of a much larger journey. Zachary Finn guided the Nebula Warden through the silent void, his thoughts heavy with the events that had just transpired. The explosion of the alien cruiser was still fresh in his mind, a brilliant flare of light against the backdrop of endless darkness. The shock wave had long since dissipated, leaving nothing but debris in its wake, but the echoes of the catastrophe lingered not in space, but within the minds of those who had survived it. In the cramped coffin of the cockpit, the three alien women sat huddled together, their luminous eyes reflecting the soft glow of the control panel. Zach could feel their gazes on him, a mixture of curiosity, gratitude, and something deeper, an unspoken understanding that their fates were now intertwined. Alpha set a course for the nearest habitable system with a space station, Zach instructed, breaking the tense silence. "We need to get these people somewhere safe. Coordinates locked." Alpha ISP responded. "Estimated travel time 6 hours." Zach turned in his seat to face the alien women, trying to soften his expression despite the exhaustion tugging at his features. "We're headed to a nearby station. They'll have medical facilities and resources to help you, but I need to know what happened out there." Who were those marauders? The leader of the group, the one who had first spoken to him, Leora, as she had introduced herself, lifted her head. Her violet eyes were filled with a quiet strength, though traces of weariness lingered in her delicate features. She exchanged a glance with her companions before speaking, her voice carrying the melodic tones of her native language, now translated by a small device pinned to her robe. "We are explorer scientists from the planet Lyra in the Orlan system." Leora began, her voice steady. "Despite the harrowing experience they had just endured, our mission was one of diplomacy and knowledge, to seek out new civilizations and establish peaceful relations. We had been traveling for many cycles when we encountered a group of marauders, mercenaries who prey on unarmed ships." Zach nodded, listening intently. He had heard of such groups, bands of pirates who roamed the fringes of the galaxy, attacking vulnerable vessels for resources, slaves, or simply out of cruelty. They were a scourge to anyone who ventured beyond the well-patrolled routes of the Galactic Union. Our ship was not equipped for combat. Leora continued, her voice trembling slightly as she recounted the attack. "We attempted to flee, but they disabled our engines and boarded us. They took everything of value, our research, our equipment, even some of our crew. The rest they left to die in the void." The other two women, who had remained silent until now, shifted uncomfortably at the memory. Their eyes were downcast, their expressions a mixture of sorrow and anger. Zach could only imagine the horrors they had witnessed, the loss of friends and colleagues, the helplessness of being left to die in the cold expanse of space. "We managed to barricade ourselves in the safe room," Leora said, her voice quieter now, "but the marauders sabotaged our life support systems before they left. We were trapped with no way to call for help until we found an emergency beacon hidden in the walls. By then, most of our crew was gone." Zach's chest tightened. He knew what it was like to lose people, to be powerless to stop it. He had seen his share of death in the line of duty, but hearing it from Leora in that calm, resigned tone struck a different chord. "I'm sorry for your loss," Zach said, his voice low but sincere. "I wish I could have gotten there sooner." Leora offered a small, sad smile. "You arrived when you were meant to. We are alive because of you, and for that we are eternally grateful." Zach nodded, unsure how to respond. He wasn't used to this kind of praise usually his work involved fixing ships, not saving lives, but there was something about Leora's words, the way she spoke them, that made him feel like he had done something truly important. As the silence settled between them, Zack took a moment to study the women more closely. Leora was the tallest of the three, with an air of authority and wisdom that suggested she was a leader, perhaps a captain or a senior officer on the cruiser. Her skin shimmered in shades of violet, and her long silvery hair flowed like liquid stardust over her shoulders. The other two women, though equally graceful, seemed younger, their expressions still tinged with the shock of what they had been through. Is there anything else you can tell me about the Marauders? Zack asked, after a pause. Any details that might help us track them down? Leora's eyes darkened slightly, the glow within them dimming. They were heavily armed, and well-coordinated. Their leader was a human, though I do not know his name. He commanded the others with brutality and precision. They seemed to know exactly what they were looking for. Zack's mind raced, trying to piece together the puzzle. A human leading a band of alien marauders wasn't unheard of, but it was rare. Most human outlaws operated alone or in small, tight-knit groups. This sounded like a larger, more organized operation, something that could pose a significant threat to other ships in the sector. We have records of their attack. Leora added, her tone grim. Data logs, security footage. We managed to save some of it before the systems went offline. It might help you identify them. Zack's eyes widened slightly. That could be invaluable. If we can get that data to the authorities, they might be able to put a stop to these marauders before they attack anyone else. Leora nodded, her expression resolute. We will do whatever we can to assist. Our mission was one of peace, but we cannot allow these criminals to continue their reign of terror. Zack admired her determination. Despite everything she had been through, Leora remained focused on the bigger picture, on preventing further loss of life, even if it meant reliving the trauma of her own experience. It was a quality he respected deeply. As they talked, the hours passed in a blur. Zack shared stories of his own experiences in the galaxy, of the many ships he had repaired and the people he had met along the way. In return, Leora and her companions, Kira and Celine, spoke of their home world, Lyra, a planet of bioluminescent forests and crystal clear oceans where the nights were lit by 3 moons and the air was thick with the scent of flowering trees. Zack could see the longing in their eyes as they spoke of Lyra, a place that seemed like a distant dream to them. Now it reminded him of the Earth he had left behind long ago, the blue-green world that still tugged at his heartstrings whenever he thought of it. The galaxy was vast, but it seemed that no matter where you came from, home was always a powerful anchor. How did you end up on this mission? Zack asked at one point, curious about their journey. Leora's gaze grew distant, as if she were looking back through time. Our people have always been explorers, seekers of knowledge and understanding. When the chance came to travel beyond our star system and connect with other civilizations, we volunteered. It was a great honor to be chosen, and we believed our mission was important. She paused, her expression softening, but we knew the risks. Space is dangerous and unpredictable. We prepared for many things, but not for this, not for marauders. Zack could hear the regret in her voice, the unspoken burden of leadership. He understood what it felt like to be responsible for others and carry the weight of their lives. But he also knew that Leora had done everything she could. She had kept her crew alive long enough to be rescued, and that was no small achievement. You did the best you could, Zack said gently. You saved lives, and that's what matters. Leora looked at him, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. Thank you, Zachary Finn. Your words bring comfort. Before Zack could reply, Alpha's voice interrupted. We are approaching the designated space station, preparing for docking procedures. Zack turned back to the controls, guiding the Nebula Warden toward the station's docking bay. The station was a massive structure, a busy hub in this remote part of the galaxy where traders, travelers, and refugees gathered, looking for shelter and supplies before heading back into the unknown. As the ship docked, Zack felt relief wash over him. They had made it. Leora and her friend were safe, and soon they could rest and recover from their ordeal. But as he prepared to leave the ship, he sensed this was not the end of their journey. There were still questions to answer, and dangers lurking nearby. Zack helped the women to their feet, guiding them toward the airlock. When they stepped onto the station's platform, they were met with a mix of curiosity and concern from the station's personnel. Leora introduced herself and her companions, briefly explaining their situation before they were taken to the medical wing for checkups and treatment. Zack watched them go, still thinking about the Marauders and the data Leora had mentioned. He knew he needed to get that information to the right people, authorities who could do something about the threat. More than that, he felt a growing sense of responsibility for these women and wanted to ensure their safety and help them find their way home. As he stood there, lost in thought, Leora turned back to him. "Zachary," she called softly, her voice cutting through the noise of the busy station. "Will you stay with us for a while? We may need your help again." Zack met her gaze and saw the unspoken plea in her eyes. He realized that leaving now would mean turning his back on them and the bond they had formed in such a short time. As much as he wanted to return to his quiet life, something inside him wouldn't let him walk away. "Of course," Zack replied, offering a reassuring smile. "I'm not going anywhere." Leora's expression softened with gratitude. "Thank you. We will not forget this." As she turned to follow her companions, Zack felt a strange sense of contentment. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. The galaxy was vast and full of uncertainty, but as long as he had a purpose and a reason to keep going, he knew he could face whatever challenges lay ahead. With that thought, Zack Finn, the space mechanic who had always preferred the company of machines, realized he was now part of something much bigger than himself. The Nebula Warden hummed with the quiet efficiency Zack had come to rely on, its systems running smoothly as they orbited the busy space station. The station's traffic controls had given them a temporary spot among other ships of all shapes and sizes. But despite the safety of their location, Zack couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in his gut. Leora's words echoed in his mind about the Marauders, their leader, and the danger they still posed. The memory of the damaged cruiser, the debris floating in space, and the desperate faces of Leora and her friends haunted him. The data they had salvaged from the wreckage could be key to stopping the Marauders, but it also made them a target. Zack stood at the ship's main console, reviewing the diagnostics Alpha had run on the Nebula Warden after their escape. Everything was in good shape, but his instincts told him trouble was not far away. The Marauders had left Leora's ship in ruins, but they wouldn't be satisfied with that. If they found out survivors had escaped, they would likely come after them. "Alpha, run a full scan of the surrounding space," Zack ordered, tapping anxiously on the console. "Running scan," Alpha replied. The ship's sensors reached out, mapping the area around the station for any signs of danger. Zack drummed his fingers on the console, scanning the data as it appeared on the screen. The station was busy, with many ships coming and going there, transponders broadcasting their identities. For now, everything seemed normal, but Zack knew how quickly that could change. "Zachary," a soft voice called from the entryway to the cockpit. He turned to see Leora standing there, her tall frame framed by the dim lights of the corridor. Her expression was calm, but her eyes showed lingering tension. She had changed into a simple robe given to her by the station's medical team, her silvery hair now neatly braided. "Leora," Zack acknowledged, offering a small, reassuring smile. "How are you and the others holding up?" She stepped into the cockpit, her movements graceful, despite the weariness that still clung. "To her, we are better thanks to you. The station's medics have treated our injuries, and Kira and Celine are resting." "Now," Zack nodded, "that's good to hear. You've been through a lot. It's important that you all get some rest." Leora's eyes softened as she regarded him. "And what?" About you, Z, have you rested? He chuckled, softly shaking his head. Not yet, theirs. Too much to do. I'm running scans. Checking the systems, making sure we're not being followed. At that, Leora's expression grew more serious. Do you believe the marauders will come after us? Zack hesitated, then nodded. I think it's a possibility. If they realize you escape, they might try to finish the job. Leora's gaze fell to the floor, her lips pressing into a thin line. They were relentless, ruthless. I fear what they might do if they find us. We won't let that happen, Zack said firmly. We'll get you to safety, I promise. Just as he finished speaking, Alpha's voice interrupted Zack. I've detected an incoming vessel. Its transponder code is scrambled, and it's approaching on a direct course from a vector consistent with the location of the destroyed cruiser. Zack's heart skipped a beat. Can you identify the ship? Negative, Alpha replied, but its approach pattern is erratic, and it's not responding to Highleys from the station. It's maintaining a low power signature, likely to avoid detection. Damn it, Zack muttered under his breath. He had hoped they would have more time, but it seemed the marauders were more persistent than he had anticipated. Leora stepped closer, her eyes wide with concern. What is it, Zachary? He turned to her, his expression grim. We got company, I'm pretty sure. It's the marauders, and they're trying to sneak up on us. Leora's breath caught in her throat. What do we do? Zack's mind raced as he considered their options. They could try to hide on the station, but if the marauders found their ship, it would only be a matter of time before they were tracked down. They needed to leave, and quickly. Alpha, prepare for an emergency launch. Zack ordered, his voice steady but urgent. We need to get out of here before they get any closer. Understood, Alpha responded, the ship systems springing to life in preparation for departure. Zack turned to Leora. Get Kira and Celine. Tell them to strap, and we're going to have to make a run for it. Leora nodded, her expression resolute. She hurried out of the cockpit, her footsteps echoing down the corridor as she went to rouse her companion. Zack returned his focus to the console, his hands moving swiftly over the controls. The Nebula Warden disengaged from the docking clamps with a low hum, the ship's thrusters powering up as it prepared to launch. Outside the viewport, the station's lights flickered as it rotated slowly against the backdrop of stars. Leora returned moments later with Kira and Celine in tow. The younger women looked weary but determined, their eyes filled with a mix of fear and resolve. They took their seats in the cockpit, strapping themselves in as Zack completed the final pre-flight checks. Alpha, calculate an escape vector. Zack instructed, we need to lose them in the asteroid belt nearby. Calculating vector, Alpha replied, the ship's navigational systems plotting a course that would take them through a dense field of asteroids a few light minutes away. As the ship powered up for launch, a proximity alarm blared through the cockpit. The unidentified vessel had closed the distance, and it was now within weapons range. Brace yourselves, Zack warned, gripping the controls tightly. This is going to be rough. With a roar, the Nebula Warden shot forward, its engines flaring as it accelerated away from the station. The ship's shields flared to life as they detected incoming fire, a barrage of energy bolts streaking past them, narrowly missing their hull. They're firing on us, Kira exclaimed, her voice tinged with panic. Zack gritted his teeth. Hold on, we're going to try to lose them in the asteroids. The Nebula Warden veered sharply, its hull vibrating as it pushed the limits of its structural integrity. Zack's eyes flicked between the navigation display and the viewport, where the approaching asteroid belt loomed ahead, an obstacle course of tumbling rocks and debris behind them. The Marauder ship was closing in, its weapon systems glowing with deadly energy. Zack knew they couldn't outgun their pursuers, but they might be able to outmaneuver them. Alpha, divert power to the engines and shields. Zack ordered, his voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. We going to thread the needle, diverting power. Alpha confirmed, the ship's engines surging with Renewed strength, the asteroid belt loomed, larger in the viewport, a chaotic jumble of rocks spinning in every direction. Zack tightened his grip on the controls. His mind focused on the task ahead. The Nebula Warden plunged into the asteroid field, weaving between the massive rocks. With precision, the Marauder ship followed its larger size, making it more difficult to navigate the treacherous terrain. Zack used every trick he knew, dodging and weaving through the asteroid's fork, ing their pursuers to take risky maneuvers to keep up inside. The cockpit, the tension was palpable. Leora, Kira, and Celine held on tightly, their eyes wide as they watched the asteroid zip past mere meters from the ship's hull. The ship shook violently as it narrowly avoided a collision with a massive boulder, its shields flaring. Under the strain, Zachary, can we make it? Leora asked, her voice trembling slightly. Zack didn't take his eyes off the controls. "We gonna make it," he said, more to convince himself than anyone else. Behind them, the Marauder ship was struggling to keep up its larger frame, making it more difficult to navigate the asteroid field. Zack knew this was his chance. If he could find the right moment, he might be able to lose them for good. "Alpha, identify any large asteroids we can use for cover," Zack instructed. Scanning, Alpha replied, "There is a cluster of large asteroids ahead. If we time it right, we can use them to break line of sight." "Perfect," Zack muttered. Adjusting their course, the ship banked hard to the right, heading toward the cluster of asteroids Alpha had identified. As they approached the cluster, Zack cut the engines, letting the ship drift silently through space. The asteroids loomed closer, their massive forms casting deep shadows across the cockpit. Zack held his breath, waiting for the right moment. The Marauder ship was still on their tail, its weapons charging for another. But as the Nebula Warden slipped into the shadows of the asteroid, Zack reignited the engines, pushing the ship into a tight, evasive maneuver. The Marauders fired their energy bolts, missing by mere meters as the Nebula Warden ducked and weaved between the asteroids. Zack could feel the strain on the ship's hull, the metal groaning under the pressure, but he couldn't afford to slow down. "Almost there," Zack muttered under his breath, his eyes locked on the navigational display. "Playa," and then in a moment of brilliance, Zack saw his opening. A massive asteroid spinning slowly on its axis offered just enough cover for them to make their escape. He pushed the ship to its limits, ducking behind the asteroid and cutting the engines once more. The Nebula Warden drifted silently into the shadow of the asteroid, hidden from view. Zack watched the sensors, intently waiting for the Marauder ship to pass. Seconds felt like hours as the Marauder ship closed in, its weapon systems searching for a target, but the Nebula Warden remained hidden, cloaked in the shadow of the asteroid. Zack held his breath, praying they wouldn't be detected, and then just as quickly as it had begun, the Marauder ship passed by, its sensors failing to pick up their presence. It continued on its course, searching for a ship that was no longer there. Zack let out a sigh of relief, his shoulders sagging as the tension drained from his body. He turned to the others, a tired but triumphant smile on his face. "We did it," he said, his voice filled with relief. "We lost them." Leora, Kira, and Celine exchanged looks of disbelief and gratitude. "Thank you, Zachary." Leora said, her voice soft but filled with emotion. "You saved us once." Again, Zack shook his head, still catching his breath. "We're not out of the woods yet. We need to keep moving and find a safer place to hide." "Alpha," he continued, turning back to the console, "plot a course for the nearest uncharted system, somewhere they won't think to look for us." "Plotting course," Alpha responded, the ship's navigational systems calculating a new trajectory as the Nebula Warden slipped out of the asteroid field and into open space. Zack allowed himself a moment of respite. The immediate danger had passed, but he knew they were far from safe. The Marauders were still out there, and they would stop at nothing to find them. But for now, they had a chance to regroup, to plan, and to find a way to fight back, and as the stars streaked by, Zack felt a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't just a mechanic anymore, he was a protector, a guide through the dangers of the galaxy, and he wasn't going to let these marauders win, not while he had anything to say about it. The nebula Warden drifted silently through the dark reaches of space, far from any known star, systems, or trade routes. Zephin had chosen this uncharted region of the galaxy specifically for its isolation, a place where they could regroup and decide their next move without fear of immediate pursuit. The ship's engines idled quietly, and for the first time in hours, the tension in the cockpit began to ease. Zack leaned back in the pilot's chair, his eyes heavy with exhaustion, the adrenaline that had carried him through the harrowing escape was finally beginning to wear off, leaving him drained but relieved. They had managed to evade the marauders, at least for now, but the weight of responsibility still pressed down on his shoulders. There was still so much at stake, so much to consider. Leora, Kira, and Seelan sat together in the cockpit, their expressions a mixture of relief and lingering anxiety. The young women were exhausted, but the fire of survival still burned bright in their eyes. They had been through so much, yet their determination had not wavered. Zack turned to Leora, who was seated closest to him. "How are you holding up?" Leora managed a small smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "We are alive, thanks to you. That is more than we could have hoped for." Zack nodded, sensing the weariness in her voice. "We're safe for now, but we can't stay here forever. The marauders will keep looking, and eventually they might find us. We need a plan." Leora's expression grew serious as she considered his words. "You're right, Zachary, we cannot hide forever, but what can we do? Our ship is gone, and we have no way to contact our people." Zack thought for a moment, his mind racing through possibilities. They were in a remote part of the galaxy, far from any known communication relays or star systems, but that remoteness was also their greatest advantage. The marauders wouldn't think to look for them here, at least not immediately. "We need to figure out our next steps," Zack said, his voice steady. "We have the data you mentioned earlier, the records of the attack, the security footage. If we can get that to the right people, we might be able to stop these marauders once and for all, but we need to be smart about how we do it." Leora nodded, her eyes narrowing as she focused on the task at hand. "Our data is stored in a secure archive, but it was damaged during the attack. If you could help us retrieve it, we could use it to expose the marauders and alert the authorities." Zack's heart lifted slightly at the prospect of doing something meaningful, something that could prevent more bloodshed. "I'll take a look at it. If there's anything salvageable, I'll find it." Leora's gratitude was palpable as she reached out and gently touched Zack's arm. "Thank you, Zachary. You have done so much for us already. We are in your debt." Zack shook his head. "You don't owe me anything, Leora. I'm just glad I could help." But Leora's gaze remained intense, a strange mix of emotions ling across her features: relief, gratitude, and something deeper that Zack couldn't quite place. She seemed to be weighing something in her mind, as if she had come to a decision. "Zachary," she began softly, her voice taking on a more formal tone, "we Leans are a people of tradition and honor in our culture. When someone saves another's life, a bond is formed, one that cannot be broken. We wish to offer you a gift, something that goes beyond mere words or gestures." Zack frowned slightly, caught off guard. "A gift?" Leora nodded, her eyes shimmering with a soft inner light. "Yes, a gift, but it is not something material. It is a connection, a sharing of our knowledge, our history, our culture. It is something we only offer to those who have shown great courage and compassion." Zack stared at her, his mind struggling to process what she was saying. "You mean you want to share your memories with me?" Leora smiled, a warm, genuine smile that softened the tension in her features in a way. "Yes, it is more than just memories. It is a part of our essence, our collective wisdom. We wish to bond with you, Zachary Finn, and in doing So share with you the knowledge of our people. Zack felt a surge of awe and disbelief. He had never heard of anything like this before. The idea of connecting so deeply with another being, of sharing something as profound as culture and knowledge, was both thrilling and terrifying. Are you sure? Zack asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm just a mechanic. I don't know if I'm worthy of something like this. Leora's eyes softened further, her gaze filled with kindness. Worthiness is not the question. You have proven yourself time and again. Zachary, you have shown compassion, bravery, and an unwavering commitment to doing what is right. You are more than worthy. Kira and Celine, who had been listening, quietly nodded in agreement, their expressions full of respect and admiration. Zach could see that this wasn't just Laura's decision, it was a consensus, a shared belief among all three of them. Zach swallowed hard, his heart pounding in his chest. This was a moment that would change his life forever, and he knew it. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him, but at the same time he felt an overwhelming sense of purpose. Okay, Zach said finally, his voice steady but filled with emotion. If this is something you truly want to do, then I accept. Leora's smile widened and a sense of calm washed over Zach as she stood and extended her hand. He took it, feeling the warmth of her touch as she gently pulled him to his feet. We will begin, Leora said softly, leading him to the center of the cockpit. Kira and Celine joined them, forming a circle around Zach. The air around them seemed to hum with energy, a gentle vibration that resonated deep within his being. Zach felt a strange warmth spread through his body, as if he were being enveloped by a comforting embrace. Leora raised her hand, her fingers glowing with a soft iridescent light. The light pulsed gently, sending waves of warmth and tranquility through Zach's body. He could feel his heart slowing, his breathing deepening as the light surrounded him. Close your eyes, Zachary, Leora instructed, her voice soothing and melodic. Let go of your fears and doubts. Allow yourself to be open to the connection. Zach did as she asked, closing his eyes and taking a deep breath. The light grew brighter, enveloping him completely. He felt a gentle pressure on his forehead, as if Leora were touching him there, and suddenly his mind was filled with images. At first the images were fragmented, fleeting glimpses of a world unlike anything Zach had ever seen. He saw the planet Lyra, its surface bathed in the soft glow of its 3 moons. He saw the bioluminescent forest, their trees glowing with a soft ethereal light. He saw the crystal clear oceans, their waters teeming with life. But as the connection deepened, the images became more vivid, more detailed. He could feel the warmth of the Lethan sun on his skin, the cool breeze that rustled through the trees. He could hear the gentle hum of the forest, the calls of the native creatures as they went about their lives. And then he felt something even more profound, a deep sense of belonging, of connection. He could feel the thoughts and emotions of the Lethan people, their hopes and dreams, their fears and joys. He could feel their love for their planet, their reverence for the natural world. Around them, Zach's mind was flooded with knowledge, memories, and emotions that weren't his own. He saw Lyra through the eyes of its people, felt their pride in their achievements, their sorrow for their losses. He understood their customs, their traditions, their way of life. It was as if he had lived among them for years, sharing in their experiences, their joys, their sorrows. The connection deepened further, and Zach felt himself being drawn into the collective consciousness of the Lethan people. He could feel their presence, their thoughts, mingling with his own, forming a bond that transcended space and time. It was overwhelming, but at the same time it was beautiful. Leora's voice echoed in his mind, gentle and reassuring. You are one of us now, Zachary. You carry our knowledge, our history, our wisdom. Wherever you go, you will carry a part of Lyra with you. Zach felt tears welling up in his eyes, overcome with emotion. He had never experienced anything like this before, such a deep, profound connection with another culture and other people. It was a gift beyond measure, something that would stay with him for the rest of his life. The light began to fade, and Zach felt himself being gently released from the connection. The warmth around him slowly faded, leaving a deep feeling of peace and happiness. He opened his eyes, blinking away tears as he looked around. Leora, Kira, and Celine were smiling at him, their faces full of warmth and understanding. They had shared something extraordinary, something beyond words and gestures. "Thank you," Zach whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how to say how much this means to me." Leora stepped closer, her eyes shining with kindness. "You have given us so much, Zach. It is only right that we give something back. You are now part of our family and culture. No matter where you go, you will always have a place with us." Zach nodded, his heart swelling with gratitude. He felt a deep connection to these women and the people of Ledhar, a bond that he knew would never fade. It was a bond formed through hard times, filled with compassion and understanding. As the Nebula Warden continued its quiet journey through the stars, Zach realized that his life had changed forever. He had started as a simple mechanic, content to fix ships and wander the galaxy. But now he was something more, a kind of ambassador, a bridge between cultures and a keeper of knowledge. Looking out at the stars, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The galaxy was vast, full of dangers and mysteries, but he was no longer alone. He carried the light of Ledhar within him, a beacon of hope in the darkness. Whatever challenges lay ahead, the marauders, the unknown dangers lurking in the void, Zach knew he was ready to face them all with courage and determination. He had something worth fighting for. As the stars shimmered in the endless space, Zachary Finn, the human mechanic who had saved the alien women, understood that he had been given the greatest reward of all: a new purpose, a new family, and a connection that would guide him through the galaxy for the rest of his days.